Welcome to Earthtide Studios. I'm Zach Knight, and in today's video, we're going to be running through how to edit guitars. Guitar editing is a pretty common practice in modern music, especially in heavy music, but also in other genres as well. We're going to look at how it's done, why it's useful, and some of the finer details as well. We've also got a free vocal production course available, which teaches you everything you need to be able to track, all the way to mixing vocals. If you'd like that, just click the link below and it's yours.
Okay, so we're in the session here and we have the guitars that I recorded in the previous video for this song Phoenix by Color and Shade. Now, let's just have a quick listen to what these guitars sound like right now with no editing. So they're pretty tight. I feel like I probably could have performed them a little bit better, but generally speaking, they're pretty tight. Now you can see here that we're dealing with, we're dealing with two lots of signal here. This is the Kemper signal, which is effectively like an amp tone, and this is the DI signal. Now, the thing that's probably the most important thing to remember is when we're editing guitars, if you're planning on reamping the guitars, this is the only thing that matters. This is cool, and this is a good way for you to be able to hear back what it's most likely going to sound like, but the DI signal is the only thing that matters. So let's have a look at the actual signal itself. We'll go with a pretty clear one, and we'll actually look at the waveform that we've got here for the DI. So let's make this a little larger. And you can see the most important thing to note is that the actual transient for the DI actually starts about here. It's not here. This is a common misconception, and when you're actually editing guitars, you want to make sure that you treat this as the start of the note, not this. So when we're editing guitars, this is working in Cubase. You want to make sure that you're in a position where you're getting these things to usually land around the start of the bar. You don't necessarily need to be 100% on the grid, but you want to be close enough. And there's a lot of unnecessary noise here in between the takes as well, which we can deal with. So first things first is we're going to grab both the Kemper signal and the DI signal, and I'm holding in Control and Alt, and we are going to move this using time shift, or moving, not time shift, sorry, using slip editing, and moving it over to the left and lining up the transient here with the grid. Then what we're going to do is we are actually going to hold in Alt, find the cut function, and cut. And then we're actually going to delete this section beforehand. This is now the start of the signal, and it's going to sound a lot better if we do the same thing for this here as well. Grab that there, cut there, and now there'll be the signal will just start straight away. Now, as you can hear, there's a little bit of scratchiness that happens at the end of the note there. That's this leftover signal here. So we're going to get rid of that. Get rid of that there. And we're actually going to look at the actual notes themselves. So it's a bit hard to see. Make it a little bit larger. But you can actually see, if you listen, this is 4 notes. So it's going da-na-na-na. And it's in time with these grids here. So you can see there is the first note, there's the second note, and there's the third note. So this one's reasonably in time, this one's reasonably in time, and this one is early. So what we want to do is we actually want to cut about there and move it over here. And that's basically bringing the transient of this guitar here in line with that section of the grid. Then bring the waveform in, and you want to do a little fade here on the end. Ideally, you don't really want to do a fade on the start because you don't really want to fade into the transient of the note, but you want to do a little fade on the end there. Now, the reason that I'm not worrying about putting a crossfade there, as I've previously discussed in other videos, in Cubase, I have auto crossfades set up. In this particular session, I've got them set at 5 milliseconds. You can do 5, 7, 10 milliseconds. It depends on what you want. I personally like 5 milliseconds for guitar editing, but that's me. And you want to make sure it's set up to equal power as well. Now, let's have a look at this other note here as well. So you can see this one is actually a little bit late. So we're going to bring that in. It's hard to tell, but this is actually the start of the note there. And then bringing that in a little bit. And then there is, you can see how Cubase has given us the advice that this is actually where it thinks the start of the note is, but it's actually closer to here. But we're going to leave it there, even though it's a tiny bit late, because it's probably still going to sound pretty close to in time. Let's bring this back over here and give it another little fade as well. And now let's have a listen to this. Really in time. We'll play it with the click track. Super in time. Have a listen to this. You can hear this like wavering in and out of the beat there, and it's not quite in time. So that's the basics of how you really do guitar slip editing there. And this part here is in time, and this is a little out of time. We'll do a little bit more slip editing. I'm going to show you just a few more parts here of how we would do it. So we're bringing that there with the transient. This one here, bringing that closer there. That needs to sit back a little bit. That needs to sit back a little bit. This needs to come in a tiny bit, a little bit further back. This needs to come in a bit. That needs to be a little bit later. Going to cut out that fade there. I usually like to keep about this much space in terms of the grid for the trail. You don't want to go all the way to the grid. Otherwise, it's just going to sound far too mechanical, unless that's what you're after. If you're sort of doing something a little bit more mechanical sounding, then you're going to want to go a little bit tighter with your editing. But for me, I like reasonably tight guitars, but not overly. So we're just going to do a little bit of more editing for this now. And as you can see, this is what I meant by when I said that it was in time, but not like it not necessarily a perfect take. A good take would have meant that there would have been less editing done on this. So now that's that side done. So as you can see, this is just playing the left side. So that's in time now. Now let's play the DI, and you can hear what it sounds like with an edited DI. You'll probably notice as well, there's a little bit of tuning wavering going on there in some of those high notes there. I personally would probably make sure that the guitar was a little bit more set up if you're going to be doing final tracking. This particular guitar, unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to be able to take it to my guitar technician and get it set up a little bit nicer. I wouldn't be using these DIs as final takes. I personally think the tuning is a little bit too wavering, but this is a good example for you to be able to see the kind of signal that you should be obtaining and getting for a good DI signal there. So now that we've seen what slip editing looks like, I'm going to show you a different form of editing, which is something that I have been introduced to recently from a fantastic producer, Jay Mars. And this is, I believe this is only available in Cubase, but I will, I hope that other DAWs will have access to it soon as well. So inside Cubase, you want to double click on the waveform that you want to be editing. Now, this particular case, I'm not going to be editing along with the main rhythm guitar. It's just going to be the DI. And you want to click on Audio Warp and then Free Warp. Now, what this is actually doing is this is time shifting. It's very different from slip editing. You're actually adjusting the waveform itself and moving the actual timing of the waveform, but also actually adjusting the length of it as well. So you can see the event start is here, so that's showing the start of the actual event itself. So if we, say, for instance, brought that over here, it'd bring that closer. What you're actually going to do is you're going to click on the start of where you want to actually bring the waveform to. Now, in our case, we can actually move the waveform so that it starts in time already and bring that down there, because we don't need to we don't need to adjust the length of the start of the transient. So this is where the next part of the guitar hits. You're creating a hit point there and creating a hit point here and creating one there. This is where you've got your transients happening. Now, that's in time, that's in time, that's in time. This is a little bit early. So you're actually going to bring this here, and what it's doing is it hasn't adjusted this, it hasn't adjusted this, but it's actually stretched this tiny part here of the DI signal. And then you can do the same here, do the same here, do the same here, do the same here, and then grab the end of the audio form and voila. And as you can see, it's not showing any of the splitting that's been done on here, and it gives you this little icon here which indicates time shifting. And what it's doing now is this guitar DI here has now been put in time utilizing time shifting. And as you saw, I moved about 4 of the tiny little sections of the note, but if you play it along with the other slip edited guitar, they're perfectly in time. This has been done with slip editing. This has been done with time shift editing. It's different forms of editing. Neither, I would say, is necessarily the best way of doing it. I personally prefer slip editing because it's something that is a lot easier and faster to do for me. But definitely, if you've got a guitar DI that you find you can't slip edit well, there are limitations to slip editing, like if the timing is too far out, you'll find there'll be crossover of notes, etc. Then time shift editing is definitely a good way around it. And as well with, for instance, clean guitars where you don't have the compression from distorted guitar there to sort of mask the signal, it's a lot easier to be able to get that result using time shifting. Realistically, both are the answer, and it's just down to what you want to do for what you want to do with your editing and what you're working with. I would definitely recommend getting your head around both and getting your workflow up. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to quickly finish editing these guitars, and I'm going to show you what the finished product is going to be, and we'll discuss why editing guitars is really good. Okay, so we have the guitars all edited now. Let's have a listen and hear what they sound like. In context with the rest of the song. So quite tight and really nicely edited, and no issues there with consistency, etc. Obviously not final takes, but still quite usable if we wanted to reamp those. Speaking of, once your guitars are edited, what you want to do for reamping is just take all of the edited guitars and make sure that you bounce them. So in this particular case, you would want to be going to, I usually just have it macroed, but it's basically bounce selection. I use Control-Shift-B, and then after that, you want to bounce them. It asks if you want to replace the events. You say yes, and then after that, you've now got your new waveforms ready for bouncing. And then after you've exported those, make sure you do them as mono, and make sure that you center them as well. So in this particular case, it's left currently for that one and right currently for this one. So I'd want to make sure that I center that, and then bounce it. And then once they're bounced, you want to go in reamp them. You can do that with, in my case, I often use the Kemper, or you can do it with a real amplifier, or you can use an amp sim. I'll show you how to reamp in a separate video. But the main reason that usually this kind of music gets reamped, and frankly a lot of other styles as well, is because it allows you to have that real fine-tune control when it comes to editing the guitars. Obviously, if you're after a more raw kind of performance, you can definitely track guitars live, and there's nothing wrong with that. You just need to make sure that you have the appropriate sound, whether or not you're actually running through an amp, or you just pick a profile that you want to do and just play the guitar in. Also, when you're editing things like solos, etc., sometimes you don't want to be as meticulous as you are in this particular case with this section. With these rhythm guitars, when you're editing solos, etc., you want to make sure that you leave a little bit more of the feel in, etc. So sometimes it might be worth leaving things that look like they might be a little bit more out of time, but the feel is still there. But obviously, you've still got to make sure that the takes are done really well as well. So that's the basics of guitar editing. And it's pretty straightforward stuff, really. But there's a lot more that goes into it if you needed to. Let's just have a quick listen to what those reamped rhythms sound like compared to the other ones now. So as you can see, compared to the ones that we just tracked now, very tight, very consistent, not too much of a difference between them besides the actual amp tone itself, but otherwise what we've got here is very usable.
Okay, so now you've got the details of what you need to be able to get your guitars nice and tight, ready for tracking and reamping. Don't forget, we've got some future videos coming which will teach you some more details about guitar production, and we've got that free vocal production course available as well. New videos every Thursday. See ya.